Welcome to the Spark Hot Seat series, where we dig into the real, raw journey of founding and scaling a business with a co-founder. Get ready for the good, the bad, and the brutally honest truth about business relationships. We are here at Spark Hot Seat, and we have a very special guest and a very dear friend of mine, Nicolas Toro. He's an angel investor with tens of investments, former manager entrepreneurship at Endeavor Colombia, and access to capital leader at Endeavor Catalyst, and now head of LatAm at Silicon Valley Bank. So please tell us a little bit about your story, Nico.
Thank you for having me here in beautiful Miami, Nelly. Very excited to be here in the first Spark Hot Seat. Excited to tell you about me and my journey in the VC and entrepreneurship world. Right now, I'm very happy to be the new head of LatAm for Silicon Valley Bank, supporting entrepreneurs from seed stage to IPO across LatAm, including Brazil, Mexico, Chile, Colombia, working with hundreds of amazing entrepreneurs solving incredible problems and growing. And happy to dive deeper into that.
So I love that you have a very particular experience with startups, right? Because you basically acted almost like an accelerator, venture capitalist, mentor, and now you are a bank looking at how do you invest in these startups? And I'm very curious to hear from you and your perspective. What do you look when you look at startups? What are things that are important for you to invest in them?
So that's two different questions right there. One is what do I look as an investor? And then the other is in my role as the head of LatAm at SVB, what do we look for in companies that we want to bank and support as they grow? So I'll tackle the first one. In the first 10 years of my life, what I call my first years of my professional experience, I always worked around extreme poverty resolution. I did the Peace Corps in Ukraine. I worked in Morocco, Thailand, in Colombia, working for an agency called the National Agency to Overcome Extreme Poverty. So that has a very big root within me, social impact. So I'm always looking to invest in startups across the region, even the world, that are solving a social problem. So I invest a lot in prop tech, I invest in fintech, and just looking to help founders solve problems of humanity.
I love that.
And now as a banker, now in this role at SBB, what I look for and what we like to support is companies that are growing. So we look very specific metrics and attitudes and market responses in companies that we want to support from the early stage, seed, pre-seed and seed, all the way to the IPO. So that's what we're looking for, growth.
Is there anything in particular about the team or the people that you look for? And this is also, I love your perspective, because your personal investment, I'm assuming you, apart from the project, you are also looking for something personal about the team or maybe that you trust them. And then from the other side in the bank, the risk assessment, or maybe is it important to really understand who is involved and who's behind that company to invest in them?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the team obviously makes a huge part of the decision-making process. And what do I look for? I mean, I usually I rarely like solo entrepreneurs, although sometimes, there is a specific person that can have all the gears in the toolbox. But usually I like to support and I like to work more with teams. And there's many reasons why. One, on a personal basis, I like to collaborate more. I'm a team player and I like to support teams. And I think that's very important when I find that echo in a startup.
I think bouncing ideas around with people is extremely important, correct?
Absolutely. Just having a soundboard and having I think something that's key is finding a person that has the humility to acknowledge that I don't know everything and I need someone to go with me in this ride that will complement me. So within that, I mean, there's a couple of different things that I like to analyze and look into to see if this is a great team.
What are those things? I'm curious. So are we talking about you personally or are we talking about Silicon Valley Bank there?
I think it's a little bit of both. So me personally, the companies that I like to invest in, and also I do a lot of mentorship for when startups are starting to fundraise. Actually, every Friday morning, I have some space dedicated just to mentor startups in that fundraising, that pitch development process.
Oh, that's amazing.
Um,
Is this a personal thing that you do with
it's a
your?
personal thing that I've been doing for a few years.
Well, now I need to put myself in that schedule.
Actually, your co-founder's already in it. I had a call with him
Very nice. You see,
yesterday.
this is why you need a co-founder.
I actually had a call with your co-founder yesterday to go over the fundraising process that you're embarking on.
Amazing. So that just give you a little bit of a context. I do have a co-founder. We have a company called Spark, as you probably know. But then we are very different and we complement each other a lot. He has a finance and operations background, and my background is more marketing and technology. So, because since we embarked in this adventure together, we're really trying to figure it out, like, what do we do best? And I think that's something that Nico has helped a lot, actually, just to at least figure it out. Like, maybe in your real job, you did more of the, product side. But now, the other side of the other co-founder is really taking more responsibility in the product just because he has a different perspective. And I think bouncing each other around and figured out what are the skill sets that we can bring to the table, even though we haven't applied them in another job before, is interesting. I think this is a new thing, at least for me, and now that I'm an entrepreneur. Before I was a corporate person, let's say.
No, I totally see that with you and your co-founder, how you balance each other up and you complement. And I think that's a great part. So, but coming back to your question, I already mentioned one of the things that I always look for is, in general, humility and EQ, like emotional coefficient, to be able to acknowledge what I'm good at and what I'm not good at and what I need, to be complimented with.
I call that attitude. I had so many experience also in the corporate world where people are very, very smart, but they don't have a good attitude about work. And they don't want to put the work actually on execution or the time or really just listening to feedback. So for me, attitude has become extremely important in anything I do, even if it's my business or if it's just a corporate life.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a point, listening to feedback. So and I think there should be a general acknowledgement that feedback is a gift, but there's one is receiving feedback, the other way is knowing how to give it.
Oh, totally.
Right? So, I mean, those are key, and those are key in a team. And I think part of the big thing about EQ is, I think co-founding is a marriage, right? It's a bonding of relationships where you need to understand how the other communicates. And I think that's a big part of EQ. It's understanding your method of communication. So for instance, maybe I'm the type of person that gets super angry and wants to hash it out right now and wants to like solve it right now. But maybe you're the type of person that actually closes yourself in, and you need to detach for a little, go breathe, and then come back and talk about it. So we need to understand how to argue, how to come to disagreements, how to solve disagreements. And you need to understand and acknowledge, like, okay, if it's a disagreement, but it's on the finance part and you're the CFO, you're the numbers person, then I'm going to give you my thoughts, my ideas and my fact-based analysis. But at the end, I'm going to have to defer to you. I'm going to have to trust you. And the same, if I'm the product person, you can come back to me and say, actually, I don't like these features that we're working on, the product roadmap that we're developing for X, Y, and Z reason. I'm going to take your advice, but I need to trust on myself because it's a trust relationship. So it's a lot about around the EQ. It's a lot around complementary. It's a lot about what other things that I look for is industry expertise. I like founders that are building within their industry expertise.
Yeah.
Maybe not all the founders have the same in-depth industry expertise, but there has to be at least someone that has been in the industry working and has developed and has grown, and not only has the knowledge, but also has the network and has built a platform.
I think this is something very important that I found, that if you're a solo entrepreneur, you're basically betting on you being a unicorn by yourself. Like, you have to have all the skills you need to do everything you need in a corporation, because your future of a startup is a corporation. So if you want to do operations, finance, marketing, and you also want to be the expert of the industry, and then you also want to be good at communications, and you want to go and be good at networking. There's so many things you need to be doing at the same time. So I think that's one of the values that I see a lot in co-founding. It's really just that complementing skill set. One thing that we are trying to accomplish with Spark as a platform is that we really want to match people that have different skill sets. So if you are, let's say, an expert in finance and funding and investing, so I would love for you to match with someone that is very good at marketing, and then that would be a very good match. So we're building an algorithm for it. But I wonder, we have the skill set. We also have the interest that you mentioned. So if you are interested in financial services or education, or let's say another one, healthcare, and that other person has also very similar interests, you are a good match also. I'm curious to see if there's another attribute that you would see that could be very good to have a match between co-founders.
So, I mean, just going down the list that I usually think of when I'm looking for founders, apart from the ones we talked to, I always like to look for a history of achievement. And I think that's very important, but it's also very different across industries. You can be a professional industry person, like you said you were before, and just I want to see growth within the industry that you're building in. I want to see success in that, and I think that complements very differently. Whether it's a marketing person or it's a finance person, has this person
Right.
evolved and grown within that industry, has something to show for themselves, and I think that also generates more trustworthiness in each other and across the ecosystem, right? And I think that's very relevant. Something else that I'm looking for is ability to sell. As a startup, and mostly I work with VC-founded startups, you have to be able to fundraise and convince VC funds, angels, like early stage investors, medium stage, and then Series A and B that your ability to succeed. Especially in the early stages, right? You need to convince people that this crazy idea that you're coming up with is going to succeed.
And one thing here that I want to touch base, a lot of people are talking about just, getting that first fund or VC to invest in you. But I see it even more than that. Like, sometimes you don't even need a VC or a fund to invest money in you. If you actually go to your friends, family, or even a potential co-founder to put money in you, that's why angel investors exist. So I think it really just, that ability to pitch yourself goes beyond just getting money from other people. It's just more, do I get support? Maybe I get,
Your first employees.
my first employees,
You
really,
need
that,
to be able to convince these people, like, leave your corporate job where you're earning a stable salary and come on this crazy bandwagon with me. So you need to be able to convince your co-founder, to convince your first employees, to convince your family and friends and your
that you're not
partner
crazy.
that you're not crazy, that this actually succeed. So that's a great skill.
And I think I love this because I worked in technology most of my career. And just trying to explain my job to my mom was an issue. Like, and then I had to learn that if my mom didn't understand what I did, no one will. Because really, you have to be able to pitch or even just explain what you do or what you're trying to do to your mom, your grandma, and your 5-year-old. And if they do understand, everyone will be able to understand and really pitch in.
So
And
does
be
your
part.
mom understand it now?
Now she understands. Now she
Yeah.
understands.
Yeah.
Now she can actually tell people what I do, which is great. At the beginning, she was like, I don't understand what you're doing in that little computer of yours and traveling around the world. And I'm like, well, now we can work from anywhere, which is also a great thing.
Let me fill one thing that I think it's important that I also like that I sometimes see within your team is, I didn't go through the whole list of what I'm looking for in co-founders, but one of the things that I didn't want to miss not mentioning is I like to see a dreamer, and then I like to see someone who's looking up, who's like the entrepreneur, like building something crazy, wants to go super super fast, and has so many different ideas. Being complemented with someone who's like looking down and making sure the details are getting like ironed out, that the nuts and bolts are actually working, and who's taking care of the finances and the cash flow and all that. So it's like one is looking up while the other one's looking down, making sure everything works. And I think that's very key in a successful startup that's going to go and work for a long time. And I like to see, and I think I see that within you guys. I think that sometimes, even though you weren't the original idea maker, I think you see you dreaming and going super, super fast, breaking things,
Yeah.
while your co-founder is more like, wait, maybe we're going a little bit too fast. Like let's hold this out. Like make sure the unit economics are going to be working. Like we're doing the finances is good. That
We are actually trying to put it in our algorithm for our platform where we differentiate it in three things. You bring an idea, you bring execution, or you bring funding. And that doesn't have to mean that you're going to just bring one thing to the table. But it really can differentiate it, especially at the beginning when you're trying to look for a potential co-founder, that person doesn't have an idea that is competitive and you're fighting for who's the biggest baby, let's say, because they say, your startup is your baby. So you have a big idea and you think that's the one that is going to really work. When you're pitching it to another person that has a similar idea, it might shock, it might be a blocker. So maybe there's other people as potential co-founders that could be a person that has worked in finance for all his life or her life, and they're tired of the corporate life and they have a lot of money in the bank and they meet someone with a great idea and they're like, you know what? I'm going to be your co-founder. I have money. I can put it in. And I also can sometimes do execution. So that would be a good complement for me to have as a potential co-founder. But I want to ask a question that I think everyone would love to hear. What about equity? How do you see that impacting the teams when they are co-founder? And then do you see like a trend of where, a normal co-founder, they come in and their two is 50-50? Or how do you see that equity distributing between co-founders?
So that's a great question. And so I'll start off by saying that in general, an idea is worth nothing until it's executed.
Agreed completely.
So I think that the closest you can come to a similar distribution, like an equitable distribution, like the best. But you do want, the idea here is you are on day one and you want to make sure that both or all of the founders, two, three, how many of the founders there are, feel like they're being well treated, that they're being respected, and that they're being validated. Okay, so maybe it's a 60-40, maybe around those areas. 60-40 would be ideal, but I think that ideas do carry some weight, but it's still nothing has happened yet.
Right.
And I think the idea is everyone needs to come into a marriage feeling that they're in a good position for success. And then after that, in the rounds that you start investing, you want to make sure that the founders never lose. There's two things. One is equity, and the other that's very important is decision-making power, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of equity, you want to make sure that the founders throughout the rounds never lose the incentive to stay up late, wake up in the morning super early, and give it 110% because they know that if they do their absolute best and put all their sweat into it, that they will be rewarded in the end. And I see that very often. I mean, less so now, but sometimes in emerging markets it still happens that the founders, because of novice VC investors, get diluted so fast that they end up leaving soon or another. And you want to have the entrepreneur there. And then the second is in the board. When you're negotiating your board seats and your voting power, you want to make sure, especially in the early rounds, that the founders have the most of the voting power. Okay? Yeah. So definitely in the first rounds, don't give a board seat or don't give a vote to the board seat. That's very important.
I love that. I think it's very important, especially for early founders, that they don't really know. They don't know what they don't know, right? So they can come in, they get very excited. Like, let's say that they get, the first investment of 500,000 and they get blown up by this amount of money. They've never had that amount of money or $1 million. And I feel like they give the power so quickly because of the money.
Don't give the power.
Don't give the power away.
Keep the power, Nelly.
Keep the power. I love what you said about don't giving out the power. And one of the things that I also want to discuss with you is, apart from giving out the power, because I think that's one of the main things that happen, that they go away and then potentially they don't see it as a failure, but maybe it's a personal failure because even the company is being successful is run by someone else. So I would see it as a co-founder as a failure if that's not an outcome that I wanted. What are other things that you see in the market happening a lot with founders in early stage that they do that completely becomes a failure for them? Like that they don't could last like 2 to 3 years and then they're like gone.
Oh my God, that's a very rough question. But I think just like any other marriage or any other business, you want to set up the initial rules of engagement within the co-founder relationship very
Yeah.
clear. You have to, I think from day one, you have to really, before you start running the business, you have to really understand your co-founder dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
You really have to do a trial period to understand, is this the right co-founder? And especially so in the business that you're building, which is co-founder matching and finding who your co-founder, which is basically your future teammate for the, I mean,
Could be
foreseeable,
rest of your life if
could
you
be
want
rest
to
of
be.
your life. You really need to understand and do a trial period of understanding what's the best method of communication, how do we argue, how could we distribute equity, you know, do you want a VC funded business or not? Do you want an international business or not?
I think what you're saying is really ask a tough question. But I think a lot of the times we try to hide those tough questions because I don't know if it's ashamed or because we don't think, but we don't know. Um, and then we don't ask really the
Or you get
questions.
too excited too fast.
Yes. And then you jump in and say, yeah, sure, I'll do it now. And then I'll do it for 10%. And then I will do it with, all the money that I have. And I think we need to evaluate both parties. And one thing, for example, that we did with my co-founder that I think we're trying to also bring into the platform is we start signing legal documents from the beginning that protect both of us. So we sign a mutual NDA. We also sign a trial offer, both of us, where we started thinking about certain KPIs that we wanted to attain. And that doesn't mean that if you don't have that a certain KPI, and just for everyone to know, a KPI is just an indicator, it's just objectives, right? So let's say that we want to have, 100 users in our platform by the end of the month. But if you didn't, hit to 100, maybe you hit 80, that was a very good outcome anyway. You need to evaluate if that impacts your business in a positive or a negative way, and then the level of effort that the person actually put into. But those objectives are very good to start thinking
That's a
about.
great idea to start with that. Another thing that I would suggest, I think just because people talk about entrepreneurship very often, they also talk about VC and venture capital fund. But something that happened in the last couple of years is a lot of businesses were VC funded when they shouldn't have been.
Oh,
So you need
completely.
to, and the personality of the founders wasn't for that, and that's fine. Do you want a VC funded model or not? Because that comes with a lot of different implications that you need to recognize.
I agree. I think one of my best friends, she has an amazing company on healthcare, health tech, and she's in Spain. And she's been doing a lot of rounds of investment. And at the beginning, she wanted to be part of accelerators. And then she realized accelerators will get a percentage of her equity. And she wasn't willing to do it. She was like, what's the value that these accelerators bring into me as a company? And when she didn't see the value, she just quit. She was like, I'm not going to do this. I'm wasting my time. It depends on the accelerator. I feel like there's some accelerators that are extremely helpful, especially if you want to land in another market and you want to learn from a different perspective from people that are mentors that you really admire. And then that you're willing to give some equity for. But if you don't really see the value, why are you putting yourself into? Just because everyone else around you is doing it doesn't mean that you have to do it as a team. So I think that's one of them. And then the other one is, really evaluate what the other person is going to give you as value, even a VC. And you said about control, especially at the beginning when you're just starting, you need to give away much more control for a VC because you don't really have a lot more to offer. So the more valuable you are as a company, the less you have to give to someone else to come into the team. So I think that's also another thing that we really want to convey to our founders is you can start bootstrapping. Be smart about where you spend your dollars and your time, and really don't accelerate yourself to give it away for quote unquote the first dollars that you get, which could be nothing at the end. It's been a pleasure having you with us. I love that you were our first hot seat. I think you have so much knowledge because you've been experiencing, the VC side, now the bank side, and even you as an angel investor. And I would love for you to give us just one or like last tip of advice for founders.
One last advice.
One last advice.
I think today is still the best day to quit your job and start doing a business that you've always been thinking about.
Oh, thank God, because that's what I did.
I really think that the waiting game and waiting for the VC market to pick up and all that, VC funds are still investing in the best startups. Angels are still investing. Your friends are still going to be there. And I think that if you've ever had the itch that you want to scratch of building your own business, today's still the best day to start doing that. So you
I
can go
love
ahead.
that. Thank you so much because I feel like people need to hear this. And another statistic that I've heard a lot is the most companies actually were born through a recession. And so every time we hear recession that, companies are not doing well, that's the actual greatest time to go and build your own. So I think, this is the best time.
Absolutely.
I love that. Thank you so much, Nico.
Happy to be here.